Hi, I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing the book Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. So this book opens on a kindergarten fundraiser night gone awry. This school has been doing a charity trivia night. It's just an evening where all the parents go out and get dressed up. There's a fun theme and answer trivia questions for charity. But something has gone awry. Someone has been murdered, and all the parents are bickering and squabbling and fighting, and it just seems so ridiculous. And we have to spend the rest of the book looking back in time and figuring out what happened, what built up to this trivia night to lead to a murder. So this book is set in Australia. It's narrated by Carolyn Lee, and she does a great job. I loved hearing her accent so much. It's set in a town which I believe is fictional called Purewi Bay, which is pretty near Sydney, Australia, and it's a fairly affluent area. And so basically the whole book is structured in relation to the trivia night. So it opens 6 months before the trivia night, and you find out all that happened, and every single thing that you hear is told in relation to the trivia night. You're building up, trying to figure out what's going to happen, who's going to get murdered, and why. And this story just draws you in. From the beginning, you hear about these parents squabbling. Between every chapter, there will be snippets of random parents talking to the police, gossiping about each other, and it sounds so shallow and so unbelievably ridiculous. And why would you care about this? What possible kindergarten dispute could lead to murder? And then as the story goes on, these kindergarten issues do become a very big deal, so that not too far into the book, you can definitely see how someone can get murdered. So I loved this book so much. It was so much fun. The characters were amazing. I loved watching them interact. It was so great. It highlighted all the things about human nature that are petty, but then are also really compassionate. And it just talked about the nature of family and friendship, and it was just so much fun to watch these characters stumble their way through this kindergarten year. So I highly recommend this book. Go read it. I really do recommend you listen to the audiobook because the narration is fabulous, especially if you're not from Australia, and that accent is just so much fun to hear. Go read this book, then come back to hear what I have to say about it. So I thought the politics of this book were handled so well. I loved the description of the blonde bobs and all the other cliques and everything you have going along. So that there's the stay-at-home moms versus the working moms, Madeline versus Renata, and all the different conflicts they're having. In the opening scene of the book, when you first start to hear the interviews, it sounded like everyone was being so shallow and petty. And why would you take kindergarten that seriously? And the book goes on, and I remember getting to the point where they had lost the class hippo, the little stuffed hippo. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is a huge catastrophe. And just really getting into it and seeing, yeah, that this is a big deal. And it was interesting to me that the parents cared about their children so much and fought so hard for their children, but at the same time, they didn't really listen to them. It opens with the whole thing with Amabella getting choked and Ziggy getting blamed for it. And no one really talks to the children that much. We start this huge witch hunt thing where Ziggy becomes the most hated kid in the school, and no one really sits down. No one notices that he and Amabella are really good friends. It's so funny that everyone's so worried. The parents end up acting way more juvenile than the children, and they just run around leading these big crusades, not really paying too much attention to their kids. And everyone spends all this time so worried about Ziggy and Amabella, and it turns out that that wasn't really a problem at all. And, the parents did blow this whole thing kind of out of proportion, but then also these kids really do have some major problems and some things that they're dealing with. I loved it when they talked about, someone was telling Jane, little people, little problems. And she felt so dismissed by that because her son did have some big problems. And then you get to that scene where so many children have told Ziggy they're not allowed to play with him anymore, and he's just sobbing. And just because you're 5 doesn't mean that your life isn't incredibly difficult and that you don't have moments that are just as heartbreaking as adult moments. And I thought this book addressed that really well. Ziggy is feeling so isolated and bullied. And they do, by the end of the book, Amabella isn't really a target anymore. Other kids are being bullied, and that is a problem. But the child you end up feeling sorriest for is the actual bully. It turns out it's Max. And of course that makes so much sense, because he's a 5-year-old who's watching his mother be thrown around the house, and he doesn't know how to process that. And it's just so sad and so heartbreaking. And it really makes you think that just because you're 5 doesn't mean that your world doesn't have some very difficult issues in it. So I think my favorite character in this book was Madeline. I loved her introduction. It made me hate her completely. She sounded so superficial and shallow and like she didn't think things through at all, which she didn't always. And you have that opening scene where she gets out and yells at the teenagers driving in front of her for texting, and she keeps saying, "I'm saving lives!" And she's so dramatic, and you think that she's the most shallow person in the world. And then you get to know her better, and she does like some very superficial things, but that's okay. And she's so fiercely protective and loyal, and she wants to take care of people so much. She reminded me a lot of Emma in the Jane Austen novel. Just someone who is definitely flawed. You know, she even acknowledges she does care too much about shoes, and she does tend to be overdramatic and fly off the handle. But she is also so lovable, and that was my favorite thing, because if you wrote down all of her character traits in a list, I would say, oh, I'll definitely hate that character, but somehow the way they were combined, I just loved her so much. And I loved it that, you know, she always had glitter and stilettos, and she wore pink, and she drank champagne every chance she got. And those things are a little shallow, but they also make life so much fun, and even her friends acknowledge they brought her so much genuine happiness. What's wrong with that? And then you see her dealing with Abigail, kind of growing up and breaking away from her and being pretty cruel to her mom, and you figure out she's distracting herself, and partly she distracts herself with the stilettos and all that stuff, but then she also tries to take really good care of her friends, and she looks out for Jane, and it's so great, you know, the day she comes swooping over with the cardboard for the family tree project, and you can see that she's doing it to help out, but she's also doing it to distract herself, and that just felt like such a real situation. So I love the way that this book built toward the trivia night. You know, you go into the book and things start feeling so difficult. I love the phrase, "oh, calamity," because it starts out being a joke, and then we do have quite a few calamities. And you know, Jane is being ostracized, Ziggy is being ostracized, Amabella is being bullied, Abigail is abandoning her mom, we have all the horrible stuff going on with Celeste, and it just keeps building and building. We have all this drama going on between Renata and Harper, and Jane and Madeline, you know, like the two teams kind of fighting it out over this kindergarten thing, and it feels so hopeless. And then as we get closer to the trivia night, things start to look up. You know, Madeline manages to get Abigail's website down because Celeste helped her out, which was so nice of her. Jane takes Ziggy to the therapist and finally realizes that he wasn't bullying Amabella, and once she realizes that, she actually manages to talk to him in a constructive way and figure out who was bullying Amabella. And after that, like, she doesn't run off screaming and do anything with that information, because we know that Amabella is safe now. She's being watched by the teacher's aide. Nothing's happening to her, so running off screaming would only be, you know, just the urge to tattle. And so she just is very happy, and she shows up to the trivia night. She has her new haircut, and she has found out that Tom is in fact not gay, and they've been flirting the whole day. It was just so cute to watch them, you know. Oh, you like jigsaw puzzles? Oh, we both like baking muffins, all this fun stuff. It was just so much fun to watch them, and everyone shows up to the trivia night, and you're feeling so happy, and everyone is so happy, apart from Celeste. And you're just going into it feeling so overjoyed, which is weird, because you know there's going to be a murder. And then you get to this trivia night, and everyone is drunk because these drinks are ridiculously strong and taste like they have no alcohol in them. And all these squabbles are coming out. You know, Renata's husband was sleeping with the nanny, and so she outs the other husbands that the nanny was also sleeping with. There's all these, like, bickering things going on, and just this whole scene was hilarious, picturing all these adults running around dressed up like Audrey Hepburn and Elvis. And just the way, I loved all the ways that they dressed up. You know, all the blonde bobs have the Breakfast at Tiffany's look, but different ones have different looks. It was just so much fun to watch everyone get progressively more drunk and run around in this chaotic environment. And then we get closer and closer to the murder, and you find out from the snippets that there were 8 people out on the patio. And so you count as they go out, how many people are out here now? How many people are out here now? And you always knew kind of the core group of main characters it would be, because Madeline and Jane and Celeste and Renata, none of them are ever in the interviews. So you know it's either them or someone close to them who is the murder victim, because you've seen all the other moms there talking, and so you know it's either these women or their husbands or someone in their lives. And then you get to that point, and you have Perry hit Celeste, and she falls. It's the end of a chapter, and you think, oh no, it could be her, but it's not. She's okay. And then Bonnie shoves Perry off the balcony, and that was so great. It was so cathartic, and of course you're happy because he's the only character you would like to see die. And that was just so cathartic, but I did have very mixed feelings about that because it made me feel so happy to see this horrible person tumbling off the balcony. But on the other hand, it felt like he had been so abusive and so subtle and manipulative to Celeste this whole book. You know, the way it built up to her where she's like, I'm going to leave my husband, and you don't know why, and you don't know what's wrong, and slowly it gets worse and worse. And you kind of see this from her perspective, and so you understand where she is in her head and why she hasn't left. And his cruelty is just so insidious. And it was feeling so relatable and grounded, and like there must be so many abuse cases out there that are so similar to this. And then, you know, Celeste and Jane have kind of bonded, even though Celeste hasn't told Jane. They're both abuse victims. They've both been assaulted, and they're kind of bonding over this, and it's this great solidarity of people being able to come together and be stronger than that, and you're hoping that that'll be able to help Celeste get away, and, you know, that Jane will heal. And then we find out that Perry is Saxon Banks, and so they were both assaulted by the same person, and, you know, that gives them something to bond over, and when Perry is killed, then you feel so much better about that because he's just an atrocious human being, so much worse than you thought, and you didn't think it could get any worse. But at the same time, it makes it feel kind of less grounded in reality. And also, we've watched Celeste struggle so much getting the courage to leave, and this feels like it could parallel thousands of other abuse victims out there who have had such a hard time leaving. And then, you know, she makes the decision to leave, which is wonderful. But then it seems like in the end it's much easier for her because most abuse victims don't have their friends conveniently shove their spouse off the balcony. Most abuse victims actually do have to leave and actually do have to wander if this person is going to track them down and kill them and be terrified. And so it worked out great for us. It worked out great that Celeste didn't have to be afraid of that. But it also made the story feel less grounded and less like all the hundreds and thousands of abuse cases that must be out there in the world. So I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but I did love watching Perry fall to his death because he was just so despicable. And then the ending was great. The way that everyone says, oh, I didn't see what happened. Oh, what? Bonnie pushed him? Oh, I didn't see. I didn't notice that. And it was so great to watch Madeline and Bonnie. I feel like they'll bond so much better now because Madeline always felt like Bonnie was kind of putting on this act. And now that she knows that Bonnie was the child of an abusive father, then she can relate to her better and understand where she's coming from. And I don't think they'll have quite so much conflict. I mean, they still won't like each other, but I feel like they'll do a better job of co-parenting Abigail from now on because they'll be able to just kind of relate to each other a little better. And I thought it was so great that no one was going to turn Bonnie in. You know, they were standing together, they weren't blaming her, but in the end she did decide to confess because it's just too much pressure to put on these people. And it was great because then she didn't even have to do jail time, she just had to do community service. So everything worked out wonderfully. And then of course we get that end where we have Jane and Tom hanging out, and Jane is reflecting on the fact that they've just kind of become friends, and sometimes that happens, but then they do get together, and that's so great. It was just this fun little happy moment after all the serious stuff that's happened, where you get to just enjoy and go, aww, and like, it's so good that Jane has finally recovered from this traumatic experience all these years ago with Ziggy's birth father, that now she can be happy and kind of move on with her life a little bit. And then I thought that final scene with Celeste in court was so good. She used to be a lawyer, she's back in court, that's great, but then she's also speaking out about her abuse and trying to stop other people from being abused. And just that scene was so powerful with Celeste, who is this gorgeous, wealthy woman who you'd think would be safe, and then the man who was standing up with her, because people often don't think of men as being abuse victims, even though they definitely can be, and we just tend to write that off. So it was so good to see them standing up, and the way that she thought she wouldn't be able to speak, and she didn't want to tell her whole story, but then she saw this man who had also been abused out there, and she just wanted to share her story for all the other abuse victims. And for her, in that moment, that was what she really needed to heal, and that was just so great, and such a wonderful note to end the book on. So I loved this book. I loved watching the friendship between these women, who it turns out are actually related because, you know, Celeste and Jane have children who are siblings, which is kind of fun, and, you know, they're not going to tell them that, but I feel like they would raise them kind of, like, they're such good friends, they'd be raised kind of like their family anyway. It was so much fun to watch these people, and, you know, throughout the story you have this whole conflict between Madeline and Renata, and then at the end, Madeline and Renata kind of team up, and realized that they did have differences, but that's okay. And it's just such a powerful message of friendship and family and understanding, and I just love this book so much and had so much fun with it.